All right. Thanks for joining us this morning, NextGen friends. I really hope you enjoyed our keynote speakers. Welcome to our first breakout session, How to Communicate with Leaders. My name is Megan Pleasant, and I am the Marketing and Communication Specialist for GovBlue. Thank you so much again for being here with us today. Let's start off by talking a little bit about our session, How to Communicate with Leaders. Communication is the most effective when we tailor our messages to our intended audience. Often there is much at stake when we communicate or try to get buy-in from leadership, and this session will cover what you need to know to work best with your agency leaders. But before we dive into all of that, we have a few more reminders to go over. So bear with me for just 1 second as we go over our housekeeping, and then we'll get into the good stuff. We just want you to know that we have some great additional resources available for you to download from our resources tab. That's at the bottom of the screen, and that includes the slide deck, so you can go back over it and share it with your colleagues when you're done. If you need the closed caption feature, look for the show captions icon that is along the bottom of your screen. And we hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but it does happen. Send us a message in that Q&A tab if you are experiencing some problems, and my colleague Jessica will get your questions answered so you can continue on with this session. In that same Q&A portal, we definitely encourage questions. We want our speaker to know you're listening and give feedback, so please drop them in whenever you want to in this session. We will try and fit them in. We also have an open chat available for you today, so we want to hear from you. Let us know what you're thinking, how you're feeling. You can also interact with some of the other attendees that are here on the program. So if you miss anything, don't worry. We are going to send you a recording tomorrow. We're going to email you a link to the entire event so you can catch up and again share with your colleagues, because you don't want to keep professional development to yourself. You want everybody to grow along with you. So let's get into our CPE info real quick. We are giving out 1 CPE credit for your participation in today's session. So just follow along. There are only 3 things you need to do, really easy. Stay and participate for the whole entire session, which you're going to do anyway because we've got lots to share. Take all of the polls as we put them out, and then don't forget to fill out your post-CPE evaluation to obtain that credit, because you definitely want that. The polls are going to appear as a pop-out in your screen, so be sure to select your response and submit to send in your answer, and then we'll show the responses at the end. You can find the CPE evaluation in the resource model on the console and at the Resource Center in the main event. So there's 2 places for you to go. And once this event is over, everything's going to be emailed to you once we confirm you've met those requirements. So no need to worry about that. We'll send it right on to you. So, all right, we're all done with our housekeeping. So it's time to get into our speaker. Let me introduce you to our wonderful expert. Joining us today is Christy Daphnis, former Federal Workforce Branch Chief for OPM. Currently, she is the Chief Operating Officer at the Maryland Hospital Association. So she's got lots of insights and experiences to share with you. So Christy, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, thank you so much and welcome everyone. I'm Christy Daphnis and I'm so glad to be here with you today. A little about me. I'm currently an executive at a state trade association, and as mentioned, I previously served as a career senior executive in the Office of Performance and Personnel Management at the Office of Management and Budget, which is where I worked for over 20 years. Lots of communicating with leaders during that time. I also spent nearly a year at the U.S. Department of Transportation, where I led a communications office that developed national communications campaigns that were really meant to change behavior around roadway and traffic safety. As I've navigated my career over the past 20 years, I've learned just how important it is to effectively communicate up your chain, down your chain, and across your chain. Today, we'll focus mostly on leadership, but these skills are really important, whether it be communicating with your peers, your direct reports, your supervisors, or other interagency peers and executives. In today's session, I really hope to give you some concrete and practical tools to help you think through your communication style and the delivery, And through these tips, I'm really hopeful that you'll leave here feeling more prepared to communicate more effectively with leadership, especially under pressure or during uncertainty. And we all know that uncertainty is very prevalent today, whether you're joining us from a federal office, awaiting news on how your agency or office will fare in ongoing budget deliberations, or whether you're joining us from a state or local government office, awaiting news on what your grant funding might look like or what direction your program might take, pending decisions happening in DC and in state and local governments really across the country. I'm also planning on focusing a bit on ECQ2 today, which is about leading people, the OPM executive core qualification. That means fostering clarity, collaboration, and trust, starting with how we communicate. And while this is a webinar format, I'm going to do my best to try to make this engaging instead of you just listening to me. So I hope you take the opportunity to participate in the polls throughout and the chat prompts. And also, please feel free to offer questions and any comments either in the chat or in the Q&A box that's available to you. So let's, as a warm-up, just please in one word, in the chat, describe how you feel when you're preparing to brief leadership. Okay, we're getting a lot of responses here. Some excited, some confident, a lot of anxious, and a lot of nervous. Hopefully today you can come away with some tips and tactics that will allow you to reduce some of that anxiety, and that will really kind of calm your nerves in around being prepared and thinking through what the messages you might want to deliver and how you want to deliver it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why communication matters. So communication is really more than just delivering information. It's an act of leadership. When you communicate as a leader yourself or to leaders, you're not just sharing facts. You're really shaping the environment where people collaborate, where and how they adapt and how you can succeed. There's a need for clear, intentional communication so that you can set expectations, so you can build trust, and so you can really foster inclusion. Good communication can signal respect, it can motivate action, and it can help people understand how their work and your work connects to the bigger picture. This is really also the essence of leading people, creating that clarity and uncertainty, bringing others along, and guiding teams through change. Whether you're giving directions or sharing feedback or elevating ideas, your communication style will really help define the culture of your team and your leadership identity. Just to share a quick story about an instance where I needed to make sure I was communicating clearly. During a presidential transition while I was at OMB, I led a team that was suddenly working under new leadership with very different goals. And this was several years ago, probably about 8 years ago or so. Oops, I just lost my slide, sorry. And we had very different goals. Our staff was motivated by continuity, mission integrity, and long-term public service. The incoming team, also motivated by similar things, we're focused on early wins and high visibility initiatives and delivering quickly on campaign promises. So I had to think through, like, how do I bridge that gap? So what I did is I started by outlining around 20 to 25 ongoing projects and topic areas our team was working on, everything from policy implementation to data transparency to you name it. Then I compared that list against the new administration's stated priorities and campaign platforms. I had to look for points of intersection. Where did our existing work naturally support those goals of the incoming administration? So what this analysis allowed me to do was to create a proactive communications plan so that I could highlight these areas of overlap and so that members of my team could do the same as they were in conversations. We integrated that framing into our transition documents and in early conversations. And instead of waiting for leadership to tell us what to do, we were ready with a message. And that message was here's why we're ready to deliver on your agenda, how we're already delivering on your agenda, and how we can help you go further. So that shift in communication really reframed our value, the value of our work, and the value of our team. It opened doors, it built early trust, and it demonstrated that our team wasn't an obstacle to their vision, but we were really their most aligned and prepared asset. So, effective communication is how you build trust and show readiness, even in uncertainty. So, um, let's talk a little bit about frequency of communication. How often do you communicate directly with your senior leadership? And I think you put up a poll.
They
So
did. The poll question was, how often do you currently communicate directly with senior leadership? And apparently my mouse got excited and clicked it early, so I apologize for that.
all right.
But I will go ahead and end the poll because it looks like we have 100% participation, and then we can go over the results.
Okay, what do the results look like?
All right, sharing those right now.
Okay, looks like either occasionally or frequently. Okay, that is oops. That is super helpful. There's like many screens here, sorry. Um all right. It's not letting me pull up the right. Oh, I gotta close that. Apologies, a little technical.
Definitely happens. So it looks like 42% say frequently. 40% are occasionally, and 17% are rarely or never.
Super. So we have a range. We have folks who rarely brief leadership and those who do it weekly. So this session is designed for all of these levels, whether you're stepping into leadership conversations for the first time or whether you really just want to sharpen your delivery. So let's talk a little bit about what leaders want. So as we approach this question of what leaders want, let's go and use the chat here for a moment. What does your leadership care about most? Performance, stability, reputation, or something else? So feel free to put your thoughts in the chat about what you think your leaders want. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of I'm seeing some performance, all of the above, something else, budget, performance, all of the above. Okay, so a range of answers here. And I think, some of that does depend. Some of our leaders want it all. And we have to be thoughtful about what do really leaders really want from our communication. They want to know, are we making progress? Are there risks? What should I do next? What should you do next? So every message should really answer two key questions. So what, and what do you need from me? So what? What do leaders really want from this communication? It's not about getting every detail. It's getting them what they need to make informed decision and drive outcomes. They want clarity on that progress, visibility into the risks, and confidence that the team is aligned with their goals. They want to know things like, are we on track? Are there any emerging issues or risks that I should be aware of? What actions, if any, do you need from me to move forward? And that's really where you come in. As someone closest to the work, your ability to clearly communicate status and to highlight needs is super, super critical. Maybe you need more information, maybe you need leadership to remove a barrier, or maybe you need their backing to advocate for a resource or for a decision. So every message you deliver should answer those two key questions. So what? What does this matter in the context of our priorities? And what do you need from me? Be sure to spell it out clearly and don't make them guess. Also, be sure to, communicate very directly what you do need from them. And while this might seem transactional, that's the purpose of communicating to facilitate understanding and to facilitate movement. So when you do provide that kind of clarity, you help your leaders lead and you position yourself as someone they can rely on. Okay. Next up, we have a quick poll. Communication challenge points. So, what do you struggle with the most when communicating with leaders? Creating the right opportunity to communicate, finding the right format for communication, developing the message for clarity of impact. So, let's take a moment to answer that poll. And while we wait for the results, um, let's just talk a little bit about some of the responses. If you chose creating the right opportunity, this often comes down to timing and to confidence. One tip is to scan for openings, whether it be leadership transitions, planning cycles, or other moments of change. Those are the times when your message can really potentially solve a relevant problem. Don't wait for the perfect moment, but be prepared with like a pocket pitch so that when you're ready, when that window opens, you can bring that communication to your leadership and be ready to go. If you chose finding the right format, we all have to understand that leaders have different preferences. Some want a one pager, others want a quick hallway briefing or a summary in a chat. Ask yourself what format gets to the point quickly and matches the urgency, the sensitivity, or the complexity of the issue. Choosing the wrong format can really bury a great idea. And then third, if you chose developing message clarity, this is probably one of the most common challenges, especially when you're dealing with a lot of nuance. So we're going to talk a little bit about the 4C model that we'll discuss shortly. And always start with, as I mentioned before, why does it matter? If you only have one sentence, then make sure it counts.
I'm going to go ahead and share the results of that poll with you guys.
Great. I'm glad to see so many developing the message for clarity of impact. Wonderful. Okay. Okay, so aligning with leadership goals. So your influence and the way and the effectiveness of your communication is really going to begin with alignment. I talked about aligning my goals and my team's goals with the new administration's goals when I first started talking. One of the most powerful things you can do when communicating with leadership is to connect your work to what they care about the most. Don't just list activities or describe your process. Really think about how to frame how your work solves a leadership problem, supports a key initiative, or advances a strategic goal. You're going to want to be putting that in the right form and the right format. Think of it like this. You're not reporting on what you're doing, you're showing why it matters and why it matters right now. This framing helps to elevate your voice and helps leaders see you as a strategic partner. So just to throw out a few tips and things that you can use, actual phrases that can help you to show alignment. You can say things like, this directly supports our agency's top line objective to X, or this work contributes to our leadership's focus on data-driven decision making, or this helps fulfill our public commitment to whatever that issue might be. Or this recommendation aligns with what you shared in last month's town hall about whatever the issue might be at hand. So you can start to see through these statements, these clear statements of alignment, you're linking your message to a shared outcome. That's what drives engagement from leadership, and that's what drives effective communication. So if you're really not sure what your leader's top concerns are, make sure you're listening to what they're asking in meetings, in other communications that are coming down, and look at what gets included in memos, in press statements, and in other public statements or conversations that you might hear. And then finally, practice the art of opportunity scanning. Pay attention to those natural rhythms and cycles in your organization, and think about opportunities that might arise over the course of time to elevate to elevate and align the work that's coming during key moments. So think about things like annual report drafting or budget planning cycles or strategic planning refreshes, things like monthly newsletters or agency briefings. Sometimes you just need a little in some of those opportunities to be able to elevate and communicate your message in a form and in a format that will really resonate with both leaders and with others across your organization. These are built-in windows for visibility. If you're prepared to frame your work strategically, they can become really powerful launch pads for using your communications to create and drive influence. So one thing I want you to think about as we're talking through this all is, how does your current project or one of your current projects support something that your leadership cares about? And feel free to drop a note in the chat about, the answer to that question. How does your current project support something that your leadership cares about today? Okay, we are going to talk next about the 4C model. This is really just a framework that's meant to help you think through some of the most important aspects of your communications with leadership. So let's walk through these 4Cs: clear, concise, credible, and compelling. These are really the building blocks of communication, and mastering them can help to ensure that your message lands with some clarity and with some influence. So when we're talking about being clear, say what you mean. Make sure that you don't have a lot of jargon or acronyms that might not be familiar outside of your immediate team. Leaders, especially new leaders, don't necessarily have the time or the energy to decode some of the technical language that you might be used to just throwing out with your peers and with your teammates. Don't assume that they know what you're talking about. If you're talking about the, you know, project that happened a year ago and some of the nitty-gritty details, they're going to get lost in some of that detail. So just make sure that you state it clearly. So just as an example of this, instead of saying something like, we're leveraging an agile framework to optimize cross-functional synergy, you would say instead, we're using a flexible approach that allows teams to adjust quickly and work better together. That's a really clear statement that a normal person can understand. If a sentence feels long, try saying it out loud. And if it's hard to explain, it's probably not clear yet. So concise. We're going to talk a little bit about using the bluff concept, which many of you probably have heard of before, but it can be really hard to get in the habit of actually doing. It feels unnatural to put your bottom line up front. But for greatest impact and effectiveness, lead with your key point, lead with your recommendation, or lead with your ask. This really helps leaders absorb the what before getting to the why or the how, and it puts it right up front and makes it very clear to them what it is, what is the purpose of that communication that you're engaged in with them. So, for example, instead of starting with a background, start with, we recommend shifting the launch date by 2 weeks to address the system dependency, and then provide the background and context. If you only have 30 seconds with the leader, what would you say? That's really what your bottom line up front would be. Start with it. Credibility. Your message really needs to be grounded in facts. If you're speculating, make sure you say so. Building credibility builds trust, especially when you're transparent about what's known and what's unknown. So an example of this would be saying something like, preliminary data show a 12% increase or a 20% increase. We're waiting for final confirmation, but wanted you to have this early insight. So in other words, you want to caveat, 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 so that you avoid over-promising, and so that you're better acknowledging the limits and show that you're tracking sort of the whole picture. Last but not least, be compelling. This is where and how your message connects emotionally or mission-wise. Why does your communication matter? Either to the agency, to the public, or to the people that you're serving. And probably most importantly, in the context of that conversation, how and why does it matter to the leader that you are delivering the message to? Just for example, let's say you're working on a project at the Department of Veterans Affairs. You might say something like, this project will reduce delays for veterans by 25%, improving access to services such as earned benefits like veteran disability payments. That's just a made-up example, but that's something that's very clear and concrete and compelling, because presumably the leader that you're talking about might be caring about the particular issue that you're speaking of. And just as a tip, don't be afraid to speak with purpose. A message that really moves people is a message that sticks. So part of the communication puzzle is finding that sticky message, which is almost like an exercise in marketing. So all four of these 4Cs, these four elements, work together. You might have a really clear and credible message, but if it's buried in 5 paragraphs, it's not concise. Or if you skip the why it matters, it won't be compelling. So which of these four C's do you find it, again, to keep this engaging, which do you find toughest to master? Clarity, conciseness, credibility, or being compelling? Feel free to drop a message in the chat. Compelling, being concise. Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of red tape that can definitely be a challenge and an understandable one. Um, but I'd think about, whether there might be ways that you can say those things in a way that that is acceptable sort of within the many rounds of edits that you might need to go through, or if there might be a different form or format for that communication. So just building a little bit beyond the four C's, um, the best communicators prepare. They're mindful of not just what's on the paper or what's coming out of their mouth, but of the tone, of their body language, and of the timing. They're listening actively and they're adapting to their audience. So, workplace communication is cultural. Talked about red tape. You might be in that environment where you have different types of landmines than other people in other environments. But you just have to learn that and see how your organization responds to different types and ways of communicating. Um, and through that practice, you can be prepared and to be responsive in your environment by how you show up, especially when you're coming at this nervous or under pressure. So, do things like prepare ahead of time. Think through your message before you're in the room. Know what your main point is, what your recommendation is, and what questions might come up. The more questions and scenarios you think through on your own, the better prepared you will be to be clear and confident, even when you're having a tough conversation. Um, on the tone, watch how you're saying something. Sometimes how you're saying something is just as important as what you say. Being respectful and calm, even when delivering bad news, might help you maintain credibility and trust. And I think this is something, that we often fall in, especially in some high pressure environments where things might be moving very quickly. You dash off an email and you're not thoughtful about the tone, and it can really spoil relationships and decrease your credibility quite significantly. And then nonverbal communication, if it's not a written document, if it's something that you're delivering in person, your body language does matter. Make sure you're making eye contact and that you're showing that you're present. Leaders really pick up on these nonverbal cues, so be careful that your nonverbal cues match your message. And listening, communicators don't just talk, they listen, show that you're engaged. Part of this is body language, part of this is also asking clarifying questions and summarizing what you've heard to make sure that you have a clear understanding, to build that trust and to avoid any misunderstandings. And then I'll skip down to this last one of creating a positive communication culture. The way that you are communicating really shapes the tone for your team and for your office. If you're someone who shares information openly and invites input and handles disagreements constructively and is adaptable and adapts to the different needs of the way that your office and workplace culture operates, it really sets a foundation for a healthy workplace where people feel safe speaking up and people feel some comfort and some norms around how to um, how to how to how to really be modeling that good and effective communication across your organization. And I see in the chat, positive communication culture is key. You can be direct while still being positive. That bingo, exactly. You hit the nail on the head with that one. I think just personally, when I first started my career, 24 years old, 25 years old, and when I first started in the federal government, I thought I need to say what's unsaid. Well, you know what? Sometimes things are better left unsaid, or maybe just tweaking one or two words here or there can really change the entire tone of the message And you can do this and you can practice this. Have someone else read your message before you send it. Or if you're going in to have a difficult conversation or to make a recommendation, especially if you're feeling nervous, especially if you're feeling under pressure, practice with a teammate or a peer. Find some trusted colleagues or friends where you can just kind of test out the message, see what resonates with different people and maybe different audiences, and that will help you to hone your presentation and hone that message for the best effectiveness. Okay, let's talk a little bit about communicating through uncertainty. Like I said at the very beginning of this presentation, I know that it is a very uncertain environment out there in many different workplaces, not just in the federal government, but at every level of government and even in the private sector. Um, I would say that you should not delay your communications. Don't wait until everything is finalized to speak up, especially in fast-moving environments. Waiting for perfect clarity can lead to missed opportunities or confusion. Um, I will say, as a leader, as a former senior executive, leaders don't expect you to have all the answers. They just expect you to manage the message responsibly. So, when you're having these conversations, especially in uncertain times, you should speak clearly about three things. You should talk about what's known, which facts or decisions are confirmed. What's the status of those things? Second, what's pending? What items are still under review or what things are evolving? And then third, what's next? What is that expected timeline? What's the next step? Or when will you follow up with an update? So using this as a checklist to say, okay, am I including everything I need to include in this communication, whether it be a conversation or an email or a memo? Um, think about those three things. Um, the current status and kind of what's up next. And really think about how you can use calm, transparent framing to establish that confidence and that trust. There are a few phrases that you can, really borrow or adapt. Things like, here's what we know as of this morning, or here's what we know as of last night. Or statements like, this is a preliminary status update. We're sharing it early just so you have visibility, so that it's clear that, this isn't an action item, but I just want to give you a heads up. Make sure it's clear that, people know that you're looking around corners and being anticipatory. Um, and, you know, while still being action oriented. Um, things like, we'll provide a full update by Friday, but wanted to loop you in early. So these are the types of tactics you can use as you're in these uncertain environments to communicate the uncertainty without just saying, well, I don't know. I have no idea what's going on. Everything's changing around me. No, just make it clear what you know and what you don't know, and really think about how you can communicate that. These phrases really help you to do two things. They acknowledge that uncertainty without over-explaining, and then they reassure leaders that you're tracking the issue, that you're communicating responsibly, and that you're helping them to make informed decisions. So, there are a few tactics that you can use to reinforce composure and to really maintain credibility through uncertainty. You can be brief and structured, using that bottom line up front format to organize your message. You can avoid hedging language. Like, you don't want to say, you want to communicate the uncertainty, but you don't say things like, well, hopefully, or I think maybe. Instead of that, you replace it with language that's more clear and certain, like at this point, or based on current information, or to the best of our understanding, because that still communicates some uncertainty without, just sort of shrugging your shoulders and saying, I don't know. Sharing your monitoring plan, like, we're watching for X. Here are some triggers that we might want to be aware of. We will notify you if this shifts. And then last but not least, creating an expectation and being ready for the next communication checkpoint so that you're looking forward. So If you look at an issue on Monday and you think you're going to have a series of updates on Tuesday and Wednesday, you say, you know what, we're going to reassess this by Thursday and we'll update you accordingly. How would you prefer that communication? Would you like an email update? Would you like us to schedule a meeting? That helps to move the ball forward. So just bottom line on this, timely and composed communication helps to build that credibility, especially when things are changing. And leaders will remember that you didn't go silent or that you didn't overpromise, but that instead you showed up with some clarity, structure, and honesty. And these are the types of things that can earn trust with your leadership. So I'm going to move on to choosing the right format. Now, we talked a little bit about structure of a communication and some phrases and other tips and tactics that you can use as you're thinking about that framing. But the format you choose really matters just as much as the content itself, because that format is a signal. It tells your leadership whether it's urgent, whether it's something that needs immediate action, and really like how much attention it requires. And it's your job as the communicator to make sure your message gets received in the right way. So here's just a quick framework. Is it urgent? Let's see if you can just talk about it. If it's something that needs immediate attention or really quick decision making, don't bury it in an email and then just wait for a response. Try picking up the phone. I know we don't do that very often anymore, but pick up the phone or schedule a quick touch point, either with your boss or someone who can help you to communicate the message, or flag it at the top of a meeting agenda that might already be happening. Um, but also assess your environment and think through things like, is this something that you could just take care of through a quick chat, like a quick Teams chat or whatever intra-department communications that you use. And in that, you can express urgency by saying things like, I wanted to talk through this in real time because we need an answer by the end of the day, and here's why we need an answer by the end of the day. If the issue is more complex, then you're going to want to write it down, more detailed, a memo. If the issue has multiple variables, a lot of historical context, or risks that require unpacking, you're going to want to document all that and use these more structured formats like memos or decision briefs or, a situation-based paper or white paper. You can often think about it like an options paper. I've laid out 3 implementation options along with some of the pros and the risks and a recommendation. These are things that you can do in an anticipatory manner as well. You might not be ready to present a white paper to communicate a more complicated idea to your leadership, but it doesn't hurt to keep a folder somewhere on your computer of issues you think that might arise, that might require a quick turnaround on a more detailed history. And then you can share that quickly should the need arise. And then if something is really political or sensitive, just try to simplify. I know that oftentimes we're found in positions where you might need to address something delicate, like a stakeholder issue or some sort of interagency dynamics. You're not going to want to say everything in whatever written communication that is. So you're going to want to stick to these high level points and avoid jargon, keeping it really fact-based and solution oriented. And some of these things might need to be paired together for the most effective communications. Other things that you should be thinking about when thinking about the format of the communication itself, especially if it's a written document, you're going to want to think about things like, do I want to use bullet points or do I want long paragraphs of prose? Different leaders expect and desire different things, especially in written documents. Some leaders prefer these shorter bullet points and one-pagers. Other leaders want every detail and every history Now, with that said, if your leader is the leader that wants that encyclopedia of knowledge at their fingertips, use tactics like putting things into appendices and thinking about the organization of your document itself so that you kind of maintain some of the most important points at the beginning of the document. Because every person that picks up that document is not going to go and look to page 4 or page 5 to find the nugget of information that they might be needing from that communication. Um, and you do have to really think that about the fact that walls of text can slow people down, especially executives. Um, Prioritize in your documents scannability. Use things like headers and bolding and underlining or call out boxes, summary boxes. These can be really, really helpful in taking a very complicated document or issue and really pointing people to the most salient points and to the most important pieces of communication. Um, Think about things like an email versus an attachment. If your entire message really fits in like 3 to 5 sentences, don't put it in an attachment. Just put it in the email body. Um, if it needs like detail or if it needs visuals, fine, use an attachment, but include a short summary with the takeaways. Um, so that if you are putting an attachment, you're explaining what's in there so that someone knows what they need to open or should open or some of the urgency and things around what that content might look like. And the last thing that I would say about this in terms of formatting in general, when you're in doubt, make sure you ask. If you're unsure of how your leader or leader you're working with likes to receive information, ask their assistant or ask their chief of staff or just observe. Some want quick to look at visuals and dashboards. Others want conversations. Others want those one-page documents, and some might like those, more lengthy written materials. And you really need to adapt to them, not the other way around. So, really think about that and how you can best do some of that detective work to find out how someone best receives that information. Um, we also have to recognize that sometimes we don't have direct access to decision makers. How can we influence and change within that environment and lead from where we are and communicate from where we are? Some ways to do that that I've often used in the past is doing things like ghostwriting an email for your boss, suggesting talking points, like saying, "Hey, I know you're going to this meeting. I prepared some talking points for you if you'd like to use them." That really proactively gets your message out there and helps to communicate it in different forms and in different forums. And just a quick example of this. At one point, I was in this endless loop of meetings where we just kept discussing a potential executive order that people wanted to put out. And we just felt like every meeting I went to, it was like over and over. Should we do this? Maybe we should do this. Maybe we shouldn't do this. Um, at some point, I was like, okay, I have had enough of this. I've been to 6 meetings about this. And so I just wrote a draft. I went and I looked and I said, what does this format look like? I'm not a lawyer. I hadn't written an executive order before that. And the next day, I just sent it to a small group of people and I said, no pride in authorship here. But I've just drafted something up based on all of our conversations. And people were like, who wrote this? This is, people criticized the draft, but it was actually a super effective tactic in moving that ball forward. Um, you have to be careful in your environment because you don't want to step on toes and you don't want people thinking like, well, who does she think she is just writing up this, recommendation memo or whatever. But you have to think about different ways within your own environment that you can be action oriented. And you have to think about where those gaps are because if you assume someone else will do something or someone else will communicate something, they probably won't. Um, Most people do not tend to be biased towards action. They just kind of wait and see. So if you are more proactive and more action oriented, it can be a really effective um, communication tool. All right. So we talked already a little bit about being bottom line up front. But the other sort of framework I just want to quickly touch on is the situation, background assessment and recommendation format. Um, this is slightly different because it does put the recommendation at the end. I would still, even in this format, recommend kind of pulling that up and putting it at the top with the bottom line up front, even though you're following it and repeating it at the end. But when you're working through this framework, you want to think about the situation, what's happening right now. Start with the current issue or the opportunity in a clear one-line summary. And then you want to talk about the background. What is the context that the leader you're communicating with needs to understand? Um, what is the assessment, your assessment and your analysis of that situation? And this is really where your judgment matters. Show leadership that you've put a lot of thought and you've thought through the implications of whatever it is that you've been considering and that you've used data and that you've done some analysis. And it doesn't need to be like hard data. It could be like, here are some pros and cons. And here's what I'm basing that on. Here's what I'm basing my recommendation on. And then you end with that recommendation. What should happen next? What action are you actually proposing? Make it clear and make it actionable. So as I mentioned, you pair this with the bottom line up front, and you still lead with your key point. That really helps you to earn attention and show that confidence. So, why does this work? Well, this situation-based framework gives leaders what they need to make a decision quickly. It really includes all the information. And then the bottom line up front ensures that they hear your conclusion first before their attention is pulled in another direction. So when you pair these together, you can make your message clear, you can make it credible, and you can make it decision ready. And you think, oh, well, this is just for a paper. No, actually, you can use this not only in writing when you're thinking about emails or memos, but you can also use it in meetings and presentations. It really is a pair of frameworks that work across different formats. And while it might feel a little bit unnatural at first to order things in this way or to kind of separate things out into different categories, once you practice it a few times, it really becomes second nature. Okay, we're going to go to our third poll. What do you think leaders value most in communication? Technical accuracy, clarity of impact, loyalty and tone, or length and formality?
That rolls along. I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A so we can tackle a few at the very end if we've got some time. About 15 more seconds on that poll, so be sure to answer, get those in. All right, let me go ahead and share the results of that.
Okay. Good. I'm really glad to see that most of you chose clarity of impact, because I think that you are right. That is really what cuts through all of the noise. And that's why these frameworks that I've shared with you today, like the 4Cs and the situation-based framework, are really important because they help you in a very methodical way get to the heart of what matters. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about real life scenarios and mistakes. I think when I think about it, I think there are three common situations where effective communication with leadership really matters and where it's easy to get it wrong if you're not thoughtful. Um, the first one is like a project is delayed. Um, so, how do you deal with that, right? Um, I would just say, don't hide it. offer updated options. Think about things like how do you express the delay, make it very clear, um, and show what the impact of that delay might look like. For example, like you might be saying something like, we have a delay in vendor onboarding, and so this dashboard won't be ready until 2 weeks after we had initially promised it. So you might lay this out and say, okay, one, we could shift the launch to 2 weeks later to allow for proper testing, or two, we could launch a partial version. You're laying out these options and you're being transparent while taking ownership and offering a path forward instead of just flagging the problem. A second scenario is, maybe you want to pitch an idea. You need to think about how do you wait for the right window and align it to the leadership goals. Um, an example of this, like let's say I've been thinking about a pilot for a cross-agency talent exchange program, and it might align with the administration's recent focus on workforce mobility or alignment. Um, you might say to your leader, I'd like to share a short concept paper or white paper before we have our next strategic planning meeting. You want to think about ways that you can use that window and that timing to get in front of people before the opportunity is gone. Um, and why does this work? You're linking whatever idea it is that you have to a known priority. You're asking for attention on that priority, and you're showing that you're considering the timing and the fit across all the other things that are going on in your world. And then third, let's think about a scenario where you might need to deliver tough news. You need to be calm, you need to be honest, and you need to be, solution oriented. So let's just say an example of this is that, maybe your organization underwent a compliance review and there are findings, right? And maybe your team missed something like a reporting deadline, or there was some communication. What you're going to want to think about is how do you communicate that to your leadership? So you might say something like, here's the situation. We've already updated the workflow. We've documented the fix. We've submitted the late file. And here's an offering of the potential timeline for next steps. So in this case, you're owning that error. You're not being defensive. You're acknowledging that issue clearly and you're outlining what's been done and offering some additional transparency and accountability while also being in a problem-solving mode. Um, so each of these examples reflects that mindset of someone who's clear, who's composed, who's solutions focused. And that's exactly what leaders want to see and what they want to hear in challenging moments. Okay, so here on this slide, I provided just a few resources. And these are things that I've found to be, helpful, or that I had found when I was looking in preparation for this presentation. Because we are in a GovLoop sponsored forum here, I actually thought that this GovLoop toolkit was super helpful. It's really meant to be for people who are acting as specific communicators in their organization, but there's still a lot of really great tools here within this toolkit that you can download from GovLoop. The Harvard Business Review, 8 Ways You Can Improve Your Communication Skills. That was integrated through the presentation when we talked earlier. So this is just more detail on some of those 8 ways to improve your communication skills. And then this last one is a book. It's called Made to Stick by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. It's that concept I was talking about of like, how do you make your idea clear and compelling, and how do you make it something that matters to people? And it really kind of reframes actions and communications around kind of like thinking about how do you market it? How do you make it really resonate with whatever your audience might be? So I've found these three resources to be good in communicating some of these ideas in a more in-depth manner. So just to recap, you want to think about, what does your leadership want and what does your leadership need? You need to know that audience. Who is your leadership? Who are you trying to communicate with? And, what is their motivation? Why do they want to hear from you, and what can they do to help you, and how can you get that alignment with them so that you can move forward your idea, or you can get across some of the points that you need to make. Second, using those 4 C's. You want to think about how can you integrate that in your day-to-day communications, being concise, so important, being clear, so important. These are all 4 of these items are important to making sure that your communication lands well and really resonates with your audience. So just um, as a refresher, those are clarity, conciseness, credibility, and being compelling. And then third, that structure, using a situation-based kind of framework and pairing that with bottom line up front. You want leaders to hear or to see what it is they need to see, what's most important first, and then you want to follow it with all of the relevant details. And if you have too many details, even in this situation-based framework, think about your format. Think about how do you use the tools available to you, whether it be an appendix or a link to something else, to give credence to and to point their eyes or their ears towards the things that are most important and the things that they need to hear. And then last but not least, you need to be authentic, timely, and aligned. If you are not using your own communication style, which, I think all of you will learn as you get past some of those nerves we talked about at the very beginning, um, that it takes practice, and you just need to get used to um, putting things into your own authentic voice, being truthful, but also watching your tone and the ways that you're communicating in different cultures and with different audiences. And that alignment, making sure that you are really thinking about which are the things that are going to resonate most with your audience and their goals and motivations. So with that, it is 12:12 and we have just a few minutes for Q&A.
Right. I will let people pop in a Q&A if they've got any questions, but in the meantime, I will ask a question. You talked a lot about communication, and as we all know, communication is definitely reciprocal. So if your leader isn't giving you the communication that you need, how can you encourage them to do that?
I think that there are different ways that you can approach this. Some of this depends on, is it your immediate leader, or is it your skip level leader, or is it like leadership at the highest level? And I think that that really depends on who you're talking about. So like, and it depends a lot on the individual. So with the people on my team, they know that in order to get some of that reciprocal communication, they have to catch me in the moment. So what they will do, if they want to communicate about something, they will put a calendar invite on my calendar, and they'll be like, we're just going to take 15 minutes to walk through this, because they know that I live by my schedule. If it's not scheduled on my calendar, they're not going to hear back from me until like midnight or something. So that helps them to communicate to me the urgency, and it helps give me the time and the space to communicate back with them. If you're talking about that skip level leader, it might be that ghostwriting of an email, or, slipping in a deadline, or saying like, how do you how do you elicit that response and make it clear what the need and the timing for that response is? Because you have to remember that, especially at that skip level or the skip level, they have a lot more on their plate than what you're even aware of. There's a lot of stuff going on in these leadership jobs that if my direct report knew that, she or her report under that, they would be like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even know you were dealing with all of that." So I think trying to figure out those opportunities and ways to put put in place some action points or response points is a good tactic.
That definitely makes sense. Absolutely. And we are at time. My goodness, this has been chock full of so much great information. And just as a reminder, you can go to the resources and download these slides to refresh your memory of what all of the acronyms mean and get tips. So thank you so much, Christy. This has been really insightful, and I appreciate your energy and all of the information. Thank you again to our 2025 NextGen Partner Alliance for putting on NextGen. We have a few quick reminders before you log off. Don't forget to fill out the CPE evaluation because you've taken the polls, you've participated, you want to get that CPE. If you haven't already, head over to that exhibit booth. We've got lots of good free resources there as well. And it's about time to head back to that conference hall. You've got to get over there so you can see all of our lunch keynote speakers. It's at 12:30 Eastern. You don't want to miss that. You can access all of the sessions and the sessions tab in the main environment. And we're going to see you in that next session. So don't miss out. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.